Welcome to Backroom Talk.
Topic of conversation today is a little bit of self-sacrifice. So this comes off the back, guys, of this new energy system assessment guide we just put out. So,
Why assess energy systems?
yeah, that's good.
That's a good question to start with, because if you don't have an answer to that, you probably shouldn't assess them with your clients.
Well, let's talk lactic. Let's get into. We have both a cyclical and a mixed test here, right? So our cyclical test is a 60-second assault bike for max calories. What feelings does that stir up?
Man, I feel like I need to lay down.
To listen to more Backroom Talk, be sure to subscribe. Learn to design personalized programs with the OPEX system of coaching by heading to opexfit.com.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Backroom Talk, and a quick little request. If you are watching us on YouTube, then please make sure you hit that like button and leave us a comment to let us know what you think of the show. If you're listening on audio, please also leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you think of it. If you have any feedback, we'll take it on board. We'll talk about the topics you want to hear about. So please do us a favor and either on YouTube or on audio, leave us a review.
Yeah, we got a request a couple weeks ago, or last week, and we're actually going to make that the topic of not next week, but the week after.
The week after that.
Week after that.
We're a few weeks out because we got Sam as a guest upcoming.
Yes. Sorry. So 3 weeks out. So yeah, that stuff is helpful just to know what you guys want to hit on and talk about.
Definitely does help, guys. Keeps the creative juices flowing so we don't get stagnant here in our OPEX HQ.
I don't know about you, Georgia, but I'm never stagnant.
No, can't be around.
My juices are
around
always
me.
flowing. I don't know what that means, but
guys, strong start to the podcast.
Creative juices.
Only the creative ones. All right. Well, topic of conversation today is a little bit of self-sacrifice. So this comes off the back, guys, of this new energy system assessment guide we just put out. So we are popping a link for that in the description, so you can go and download that and have the guide as a reference. But Carl and I are going to do a little bit of an experiment, and we are going to take the 5 energy systems tests that are laid out in that guide and put ourselves through them to provide entertainment, but no, really for the experience and for the education, and just a little bit of self-reflection as well.
Yeah, nothing we haven't done before, so it won't be the first time. Well, for you, will it be the first time on?
No,
on
I've done all of them before.
Yeah, me too, and I think that's probably the drawback is you know what's to come. If I was coming into this thing blindly, for lactic repeat, for instance, I'd probably be like, yeah, that shit looks okay. Like, I'll hit that, but yeah, that's a tough one. So, not looking forward to hitting that, but doing it for the not for the gram, for the tube, but also for the
podcast
audio,
on whatever audio
yeah.
platform you listen to. I don't know, Apple or Android. So, I think before we actually talk about what those assessments are, what our mindsets are going into them, maybe some of the strategies we're going to take, how we're going to lay it out over the next week, let's just talk about brief hit on energy systems and why a coach would actually assess them. So do you mind starting there, Carl?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with why assess energy systems.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean that's a good question to start with, because if you don't have an answer to that, you probably shouldn't assess them with your clients. And when we start to look at, in its entirety, why is it important to understand what someone's let's just say work capacity is, like all energy systems. What someone's work capacity is it just tells us how able they are to do hard work and recover from that hard work, and how they respond to that hard work, not only physiologically, but emotionally, and psychologically as well. And there's some of these tests that we'll walk through today that we wouldn't recommend 90% of people doing, but we'll talk about who they are for. But for something like a 5K row or a 10-minute assault bike or something like that, if someone has the capability to row for 20 plus minutes or however long that thing's going to take and have great technique, it's a great opportunity to test someone's, let's call it aerobic capacity or aerobic threshold, particularly on the rower. And when we start to look at what are benefits to understanding what someone's aerobic threshold or capacity is? We understand that being able to sustain work over any given amount of time is a good thing. But when we start to talk about when we start talking about maximizing scores in any of these tests, it's like now we're starting to spill over into someone sacrificing their health for performance, right? There's a big difference between a 16-minute 5K and a 22-minute 5K, right? Like obviously there's a big difference there, but when we start looking at people that are pushing the sub 16-minute 5K, they might not be the healthiest people in the world, although they have the, greatest scores on their VO2 maxes. So I think it's important to understand, just where someone sits, so you understand what kind of work to give them and what kind of pacing strategies to give them and how much, let's call it, experience they have in that modality or in that particular energy system.
Yeah, I think it's an important reminder as well for coaches to think about the fact that performance and high performance on these assessments or tests doesn't always equal health. And there is, like you said, such a thing as being so fit and having such high performance that you're, no longer pushing the bounds of health. You're going towards something else.
Yeah, but as a coach, right, if you're giving these assessments to your clients safely, there's a lot that coaches can learn from their clients by taking them through these. Even if they're doing something like the lactic repeat, and let's say you have someone that is 100% capable of expressing high power throughout the 3 to 5 minutes for some people each set.
6 minutes for some.
We're going to cap it at 5. But even if they are able to express that and they're not competitors in fitness and stuff like that, you can still take someone through a test like that and learn a lot about them. And we'll talk about it when we get there. But yeah, there's some things that you can extrapolate by giving people really hard work and telling them, I want you to give me the best score possible.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a step back now, and actually just lay out those 3 energy systems. We did a podcast talking exclusively about this a couple weeks ago, so I'll make sure again to link back to that in the description so you guys can watch that one. But a brief hit on gain, pain, sustain. So gain is our anaerobic alactic energy system. Pain would be our anaerobic lactic, and then sustain is going to be our aerobic energy system.
Yep.
Anything else you'd add there for clarification?
No, we'll as we walk through each test, we'll give you guys more specifics so we can actually connect it to work, just so people can understand. We're talking about CP, ATP, or alactic here, and then lactic, and then aerobic or oxidative, and we'll talk about how each test connects to those things. I think it'll be a little bit easier.
I think so too. So let's start with gain. So for our OPEX gain energy system assessment, we're going to do a 10-second peak watts on the assault bike. And the intention behind that test would be looking at how effectively we're able to express power.
Is it 10-second peak watts, or are we just saying peak watts?
Peak watts.
Okay.
Sorry, peak watts.
Got it. Yeah, so like you said, right, like that's OPEX gain, right? So that's CP, ATP, and anaerobic alactic. So what we're looking at there is, sorry, am I jumping ahead? Am I supposed to talk about what
No,
we're
you're
looking at
good.
there?
Go for it.
Sorry, Georgia keeps me in check sometimes.
This is your podcast too. You say what you want to say.
I'm just here. I just show up. I show up and I do what I'm told most of the time. I do what I'm told.
All right, talk to us about gain.
Yeah, so gain, CP, ATP. So 10 sec. Now I'm using your language.
Sorry.
Max wattage on the assault bike.
Yes.
So all we're looking for is we're looking at how much power potential someone has on the assault bike, which is so low barrier where, we say it's on the assault bike, but anyone can get on a bike and spin really hard. So I correlate that directly to just power output in general, because you're not going to get a really powerful person on an assault bike and they're like, I'm way more powerful, but this bike is holding me back because it's too complex. It's like, no, it's not. Just pedal, push, and pull. So that's why we like the assault bike for this test over the rower or even over the spin bike. So yeah, so we're generating as much peak wattage as possible, and how the test is executed is the person has to look at their monitor and they just rip it. They go as hard as they possibly can, and they'll see that number get to a peak wattage, and they just stop as soon as that number starts to go down. So usually we do see, 8 to 12 seconds. So that's why 10 seconds makes a lot of sense. We see 8 to 12 seconds is when most people hit their peak wattage. And once it starts to go down, you're not bringing it back up. So just stop. And it's a really fast test. Before you know what hits you, it's done. Before fatigue kicks in, it's done. And then when we connect that to the ATP system or the CP ATP system, that's what we're utilizing as fuel, right? Like we're utilizing that system as fuel mainly. And once it runs out, and it runs out very quickly, that's when those watts start to do this. And that's when you shut it down, because if you start to continue that, and we'll talk about it when we get to the 60-second assault bike test, but once you start to continue that, now you're starting to look for different fuel substrates, and you go into that lactic energy system instead of that lactic energy system.
Would you have someone make multiple attempts at the peak watts with rest in between, or just like one and done?
Yeah, I'd go typically 2 to 4 attempts. Yeah, so usually when you jump on, you're kind of like gearing up that system, or you're like turning that system on, and then you just rest as needed until usually it's 2 to 4 minutes, and then you go again, and then usually you'll start to see in sets 2 or 3, you'll see those watts go up because the system is starting to be turned on and primed. So yeah, I would go, let's call it 2 to 4 sets, and then, on that, when you start to see that the watts aren't going up set by set, then just shut it down and say, hey, that was my peak wattage for the day.
Now, considerations to going into that, and who it may or may not be appropriate for. Obviously, the person has to be strong enough to actually express power on that bike.
Mm-hmm.
So at a baseline, is it body weight back squat and 1.25 body weight deadlift? Or
I would throw anyone on there.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, if we think you're a weak person, let's get on, because what's the worst that can happen?
True.
They're just not going to generate power. So anyone can get on a bike and go as hard as possible. It's when you have those people, let's call it the people that aren't as powerful, or like you're saying, like aren't strong enough to express. Like we'll figure that out after they do the test. It's such a quick hitting test. It's low barrier. It's not going to leave them on the ground. They can do it before a training session. So yeah, I would just throw someone on there and see if they can express. And what we're looking at, so let's do it this way. What a solid score is, let's not call it solid, a good score is body weight times 10.
Okay, I didn't know that.
In wattage.
Body weight times 10.
Body weight times 10 in wattage.
All right.
So if you're a 185-pound male, you're 1850.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
I need 50.
Yeah. I'm right. Yeah,
That was
1850.
correct math.
Yeah.
10 is like a nice number. Did you pick that because it was easy to multiply on the spot?
Maybe. No, that's a good score, right? So if you're over 200 pounds, you should be maxing out the assault bike. If you have an older model, it'll say 1999, and if you have a newer model, it'll actually allow you to go over 2,000 watts. So yeah, body weight times 10 is a very good score on there.
So I'm sitting about 150 pounds. That means I want about 1,500.
Yeah. What's your max wattage, you think?
I really don't know.
I think you're going to be like 1350.
I feel like I can remember 14 something from like years ago. So
based on your bench press, you're going to be 1,500 then.
We'll see. I mean, that was my
Georgia
upper body.
Yeah, Georgia hit a all-time PR in the bench press at 250 pounds the other day.
There we go.
Let's just leave it there.
Let's leave it there.
Let's just leave it. Don't tell people
No,
what you actually hit.
I will say I was very proud. I felt good about it. Walked in the house, said to my husband, I got a PR on my bench press. Guess what it was? And he says to me, 175 pounds. And it was 150. So that was disappointing.
Does that just make you feel worse? When
so much worse.
That's like when you ask, you don't have kids yet, but sometimes I'll ask my kids, like, you think I can touch that? And they'll be like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, damn, I wanted them to say no, and then I wanted to touch that thing and impress them, but they just have like such high expectations that it's tough to impress these people.
Oof.
Family members,
Seriously.
they just give us too much credit.
Well, hopefully you can impress them with your peak watt score.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What are you feeling you're gonna get?
I'll get over. I think I'll get over 2,000.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll get over 2,000.
Well, we'll be letting you guys know next week. We'll do a recap of what the process is like on next week's episode. So make sure you tune back in for that. I guess other things to remember, and you already hit on this, Carl, but just the reason it's the assault bike is it's the best modality to be able to get that like fast turnover and express power quickly. Mm-hmm. We don't test the gain system with something that's mixed modal. We're not going to be doing power cleans and burpees and double unders because you just can't get enough power in that short period of time.
You can't get enough. No, I'm joking. And also realize that this is a test that, because when we start looking at training the system, it's a little bit weird, right? Because we call it OPEX gain. So it's CPATP, but this is actually the starting point of a lactic build, right? So you have to be able to express this power appropriately and do it over and over and over with an appropriate amount of rest for 10 seconds before you do 30 seconds, before you do a minute, before you do 3 minutes. So although this is OPEX gain, quote unquote, it is a precursor to an OPEX pain build, if that makes sense.
So would you be looking, like, let's say you have a client, you're thinking about putting them through an OPEX pain build. Would you be making sure they can hit that 10 times body weight number on the assault bike before you go into that pain progression, or not exactly?
No, just because think about it, right? Like 10 times is a really good score.
Yeah.
So maybe we're looking at 8 times as like okay, yeah, there's some power being put out here. And then you can also look at, because it's just easier for us to wrap our brains around absolute scores. But the way that we should actually do it is we should have someone go on the assault bike. Let's say we do like a 5-minute EMOM, right? Every minute on the minute. And I want you to get to max wattage every minute on the minute. So we can put someone on that. They can go as hard as they possibly can. They can be at 7 times body weight. And we could stop them there, and we could be like, okay, we need to go get stronger. They can't express, blah, blah, blah. But if we did that 5-minute EMOM, we should see a degradation of scores of wattage across those 5 minutes. So if we're confident that they're going 100% and we see a degradation across those 5 minutes, they're strong enough. They're putting out enough power because they can't recover from that max wattage or that 10-second. So it'd be 5-minute EMOM, 10-second assault bike as hard as possible. Yep. If they're degrading each set, I don't care where they could be at 6 times. I'd be like, okay, they're expressing power relatively, so they're good to go on this build. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So
does.
I think it's important I think it's beneficial to have absolute scores, but also just kind of testing this stuff in the gym and kind of coming to your own conclusion as a coach. Like, are they going to benefit from this work? And if they're not recovering from incomplete rest periods, that's telling us that they're putting out enough power to not recover from incomplete rest periods.
Well, I am excited to see what happens in these 8 to 12 seconds. I'm definitely not going to be using this information to go through my own lactic build after it. So,
or maybe you will. I don't know. Maybe there'll be some insights in that thing, and you'll be like, "I'm inspired to go through this lactic build now."
Well, let's talk lactic. Let's get into. We have both a cyclical and a mixed test here, right? So our cyclical test is a 60-second assault bike for max calories. What feelings does that stir up?
Oh, man, I feel like I need to lay down and like have a pillow and like go through a therapy session right now. It stirs up a lot of pain.
Yeah,
it does. It is a terrible test if you can express.
Yeah.
It's a terrible test. You go through waves of emotion, right? It's like you're getting started, adrenaline is high, you're excited to go, you're thinking about how you're going to approach it, and then once you get to like the 3, 2, 1's happening, you get to 1 and you're like, I just got to go as hard as I can for as long as I can. And then you're rolling and you're feeling like Superman or Superwoman for the first 15, 20 seconds. And then reality starts to kick in. And reality is RPMs go from, let's call it 115 to like 85 like this. And everything just stops. You start to realize that you're running out of those fuel stores. And you realize how much time you have left. And then that second wave of like, oh shit hits, because the first wave of oh shit is when you can't go as hard. And then the second wave hits when you realize that you're not even halfway done with the test and you're trying to organize your brain around how do you finish this thing. And then you're just holding on for dear life. And then you're thinking, okay, I accumulated this amount of calories, like I'm only halfway through this thing, or I'm halfway through this thing. I can't stop now. I just got to keep going, or else I just wasted all of those calories. And then you just finish. And then when you're done, you're like, that hurt, but it wasn't that bad. And then 30 seconds passes and you're like, oh shit, like blood isn't leaving your quads. You have that feeling in your chest and you just want to lay down and put your feet vertical to get blood back into the core, and it doesn't go. Just doesn't go back into the core, and that can be minutes for some people or hours for others where it just hurts. So that's what I think about when I think about this test.
It's a beautiful little reflection right there. It's getting me so pumped up to do this one. So 60 seconds, max cals on the assault bike. What exactly are we testing there?
Yeah, we're just testing lactic capacity, let's call it, on the bike. So lactic capacity or lactic threshold. And it feels the same as the max wattage for the first little bit. And then once that ATP runs out, then you're like, okay, I got it, but I still have to keep going, right? So power decreases over the 60 seconds, and pain increases over the 60 seconds. So yeah, we're just looking at lactic threshold or lactic capacity here.
Who would you test something like this with, and why would it be important for them to have a good number?
Yeah, gosh, there's a couple people that come to mind, right? Like you look at someone like a cyclist, right? And you want to understand how efficiently they can utilize lactate as a fuel source once they hit that 20, 25, 30-second mark. And you start to realize, you have someone that goes from that 115 RPM to that 65 RPM, and you're like, they're not utilizing it very effectively. And then you get someone that goes from 115 and then they hit like 105 and then 100 and then they finish high at like 95 RPM, and you're like, yeah, they're pretty good, and they have a good absolute score. You're like, yeah, they're pretty solid here. So it's important to test stuff like that to understand how well those like a cyclist can deal with having lactate in the system, because that is the sport we talked about a couple weeks ago, but that is the sport where you have to be able to live with that shit like in your system, because it's there, and it's not there for just 60 seconds. It's there for a really long time, and you have to buffer it out and get through that very efficiently. It's also insightful when you get into like fitness, right? Like CrossFitters, functional fitness, mixed modal athletes, to understand how well they can recover from that work. So the 60-second capacity test, it tells you a lot about someone when they can't recover effectively from it, like
when they're on the floor,
yeah,
and
for hours, right? So, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? For a person, depending on where they're at in their season. Off season, you're focusing on, I want to be the strongest and most powerful that I possibly can, and you're not really focusing on like, shorter, intense, recoverable aerobic work. That's probably good, right? It's like, yep, you're putting out a lot of power. Your absolute score is higher than it will be when we're in a pre-comp phase. You're solid, right? And then you get closer to competition and you start to think about the characteristics that you want an athlete to possess. Near competition, you want them to be able to put out a decent amount of power and recover really, really effectively from that power, because they're doing multiple events in a single day, and they're doing multiple days of those various events. So someone going into someone that's coming out of a pre-competition phase, they're going to be less powerful than they were in their off season when they were focusing on like high power, longer aerobic work, so on and so forth. We don't want that when we're in pre-comp, right? We want maybe a 5% decrease in overall power on this test, but we want them to be able to recover very effectively from it, because now that starts to look like the sport, like doing things sub-maximally, because you're not going at it maximally in the sport, and being able to recover and possibly do it again. So we'll talk about that in lactic repeat because it's more relevant there. But understanding what absolute scores are depending on where an athlete is in their season is beneficial. For a general population person, it's not. This isn't a beneficial test at all. Like, we don't really give a shit how well general population people can utilize lactate as fuel. We actually don't want to do that for them. We can talk about the metabolic effects and stuff like that of training the pain system. But now I think we start getting into like weird waters where people are going to misuse that. So I wouldn't even go there. But the test itself isn't beneficial, because we're not saying like, oh, you have a really high score in the 60-second test. That means that metabolically you're here or there. there's no point of even touching it for anyone else. And then we start to look at field sport athletes, and it's like, it's not beneficial for them either. So very few people need to, not very few people need to test it. I think it's beneficial for coaches to jump on and do this thing and feel it, but very few of your clients are going to need to have this test as like a staple in their assessment program.
Yeah. Well, coming back to the CrossFitter, I mean, we're going into open season right now. So now would be the time where you're looking for lower absolute score, but higher ability to recover from that, right?
Yeah, slightly. Yeah,
Yeah.
very slightly lower absolute scores. Yep.
Yeah. You'd see that on like the row 30/30x4 test too, right? Like around this time, more consistent scores than you'd see if someone was in an off season with a really high 1 and 2 and then a big drop off.
Yeah, and it all relates to what we're doing in training. That's what it really is, right? It doesn't really matter how fit you are. It's what are you doing in training right now? And, someone that's coming closer to season, when we look at the 30/30x4, so that's 30 seconds row at 100%, 30 seconds rest, and you do that 4 times. And those numbers tell us a lot, or the degradation of those numbers tell us a lot. And someone is going to degrade at a lower rate if they're doing higher turnover, higher intensity aerobic work versus someone that's doing, let's call it like an alactic build, and they're doing a bunch of strength work, intense strength work, or even a lot of volume and strength work. So yeah, it depends on where they're at in the season, for sure.
I think it's an important reflection because it does really speak to the fact that you can't just throw assessments or tests at clients at any point throughout the year and expect them to be successful and not have a reason behind why you're putting them in that certain period of time. Like, you have to be looking for certain characteristics, and they have to be connected to what's going on in training and trying to get insight into whether or not that training is doing what you want it to do. Mm-hmm. You're not just giving it to them to get a number spat out.
Yeah, and it is beneficial for coaches that are coaching athletes to take them through the gauntlet, essentially, of assessments and saying, okay, we're going to go a couple weeks and we're going to test all of these things to get an initial insight. But when you retest those things, like you're saying, you have to make sure that you're increasing the potential to improve those skills based on what you're doing in training. For instance, right, like, we're not going to take someone through the gauntlet, give them the 60-second assault bike test, take them through 16 weeks of, let's call it 2 cycles of accumulation, hitting like 15, 30, 60-minute aerobic pieces, no lactate work at all, a bunch of resistance training, and then at the end of that, 12 or 16 weeks, say, we're going to retest your 60-second assault bike, and I expect it to get better. It's like, you're going to look like an asshole because their score is either going to be the same or maybe even get a little bit worse based on what they did when you first gave them that test, because you're not setting them up for success on that test, right? Instead, wait until you get to an intensification phase. You've trained lactic power 1, you've trained lactic power 2, you have some lactic endurance training, rest, and then retest the 60-second, and you'll see some awesome improvements because they're training that system specifically for an amount of time.
Yeah, I think a mistake coaches do make is they're used to working with beginners, though. And so they, give them a 5K row, do nothing that would actually, improve that 5K row. They retest the 5K row, and the 5K row is better just because the person started doing fitness consistently. So that would be a trap to avoid falling into, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It'd be a trap because it'd be a trap for the coach that thinks that they can extend that for years with that person or even months with that person. But I would actually lean into that for beginners as well. If the 5K row is important, but if the 5K row is important, train someone for the 5K row, right? Like, I'm just not for throwing tests at people and just hoping that they got better at it. Because what happens when the client says, why are we testing this? What have we done in the program in the past to make sure that I've gotten better at this? If the coach is like, I don't know, you're a beginner and I think you're just going to get better because I gave you a bunch of shit. Like, I think that's the wrong answer. So I think people just need to be really targeted in terms of what they're assessing and why they're assessing it. And it's so, for some coaches, that scenario is very attractive because they can put on Instagram, my clients are getting better, blah, blah, blah. Right. But like, you just run out of that. You know what I mean? You run out of it. And it's almost like, throwing the kitchen sink at someone when they're not ready for it, or when you can't sustain that. And I mean, what improvements are you going to show 3 years from now with that same client that you're still coaching? Like, you're not going to see those types of improvements. So maybe with that client, you're setting them up for, mismanaged expectations in terms of how quickly we get better and how far to the right we can push that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think about the times I have made mistakes like that earlier on in my coaching career, and it just doesn't feel good, right? It's hard to go to sleep at night because you're feeling a bit like an imposter, and like you're going to get caught out, and the client's going to realize as soon as they come to retest it that you didn't actually know what the hell you were doing, and
Yep.
they didn't actually get better.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the whole idea of test or assess beginners frequently, and then as they become intermediate, advanced, it becomes seldomly. It's because of that, right? But even with beginners, the stuff that you're testing them on frequently, I would still ensure that you're training those things to ensure that they're getting better, and maybe put a couple litmus tests in there a couple weeks prior to you testing to make sure that thing is getting better. If you're going to do a 60-second assault bike test with someone, maybe 2 weeks out, test them on the 20-second, test them on the 30-second, and kind of look back at what they did initially. And it's like, are they putting out more power in the 20 and 30 seconds? And if you're like, wow, they're going to like 1.5 times what they did, awesome, test it in 2 weeks. But if you're like, oh my gosh, they actually got less powerful, maybe don't test that.
Yeah.
Because you're setting them up for failure, and you need to look at your program and just kind of look at what you did wrong, because none of us get it right 100% of the time. But we could put measures in place like litmus tests to ensure that we're setting our clients up for success emotionally, because it's devastating when you give someone a test multiple times and they see like the bar going down. Like, that just sucks.
Well, let's talk about one test you do not want to give your beginner client, and that's not going to make anyone feel good, which is the lactic repeat. So that's our second OPEX pain assessment using mixed modalities. So I'm going to read it off because otherwise I'm going to get it wrong. But for time, 250 row, 15 kettlebell swings at 70-53, 25 burpees, 15 kettlebell swings, 250 row, rest 12 minutes, 3 times. Not at a sustainable pace.
As hard as possible.
As hard as possible every time. So
Yep.
250, 15, 25, 15, 250.
Mm-hmm.
Try to come back to life in 12 minutes and then do it again. Twice. Two more times.
2 more times, yeah.
And the movements inside of that, the row, the kettlebell swing, the burpee, like such high turnover. Someone's able to like express a really high output of power. They're able to make himself really hurt doing those activities. Yep. We don't have something like a double under or a ring muscle up or a ski erg for most people in that, because they wouldn't be able to get the same level of hurt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about the emotions that go through someone's head when they do this one. I'll be short on this one. I'll try to be. Set 1, 250 meters. You get in, you strap in, have your damper set right where you need it. Everything feels really good. You're rolling. You're like, I'm really powerful. Like, everything's feeling good. My stroke rate is right where I want it. I'm breathing properly. Like, everything's good. Before you know it, 250, done, right? And you're like, yeah.
Superstar.
I crushed that. Kettlebell swings. You pick up the kettlebell. You're like, okay, yeah, 70, 53, a little heavy, but I still got some oomph in my hips, right? You're just boom, goes overhead, boom, goes overhead. Before you know it, 10, 12, 15 reps, done. You're like, I'm on top of the world. You start your burpees. You're like, okay, I haven't done any pushing yet. I'm feeling really snappy and fast out of the bottom of the burpee. Everything's feeling good. Like, hitting that, perfect burpee. Everything's great. You get to 8 reps. You're like, yep, solid. You get to 10. You're like, solid. You get to 12. And you're like, okay, that took a little bit longer than I thought to get to 12. And then you start to realize 12 isn't halfway. And then it's like, doubt starts to set in. You're like, oh shit, I'm not halfway through these burpees. I have to do 13 more. And then you start to think about what you have to go back and do, and all that stuff that felt really good. You're starting to think, how is that going to feel now? So you finish, you get to 25 burpees, you do it effectively. Power's still pretty high. Adrenaline is gone. Adrenaline's gone. Power's still high though. You pick up the kettlebell and you're like, ooh, this feels like 85 and not 70, but I'm going to work my way through this. Still get through it. Good. You get to 10 reps. You're like, okay, I just need to finish this so I can lie on the ground or walk around and rest after. You finish, you get back on the rower, and your breath rate is 2x what it was set number 1, or 250 number 1. And you start to feel this burning in your legs, and then the burning starts to hit your lungs. And you're like, oh my God. And you're rolling, and you're like, maybe I'll finish this in 45, 40 seconds, something like that. And power's still high though. You finish, and you're like, how the fuck am I going to do that at that rate 2 more times? I don't care how much rest I have. Because before you jumped on, you were like 12 minutes. I can go take a pee. I can go wash my hands if I need to. I can grab a drink. I can kind of socialize. 12 minutes is an eternity. But then you start to realize that 12 minutes just isn't enough time. And then you attack number 2, and you're fearful. You're scared. You're like, how is it going to feel after this? So you're like, my coach is here, and he or she is telling me I need to go 100%, but do I want to leave a little bit in the tank because I have another one? I can't leave any in the tank. I got to go as hard as I can because that's what they told me to do. You finish that, and you're like, probably a little bit worse, probably about 10 seconds worse on it, and you're like, I can't do that again. I just can't. You lie on the ground, and the person next to you is like, you're at 11:30, and you're like, I only have 30 seconds, and then you just will your way. Adrenaline kicks in, and you finish set number 3. Set number 3 actually felt better than set number 2 because there's nothing after it, but your body hurts, and you never want to do this again.
My heart is racing, Carl. I feel like I just lived through the lactic repeat test, and we have to do that shit? Are you kidding? That's what it is.
Yeah, that's why every time you've mentioned this the past 2 weeks, I turn white. I start getting clammy. Georgia says, "Are you okay? Are you backing out?" I'm like, no. I want to do this. I love this, but that's how it's gonna feel.
I just want to get it out of the way. I feel like I just need to go to it right now so that
Yes.
that I don't have to dread it any longer.
Yep.
What are we testing?
Lactic endurance. Yeah, so we're testing mixed modal lactic endurance. Low barrier movements, high turnover, like you said at the start. Kettlebell is a little bit less. The kettlebell swing is the best part of it because you have an opportunity to breathe at the top. It's nice and controlled. The burpee is the worst part of it because the volume is so high you don't realize that you're doing 75 burpees as fast as you possibly can. Even 75 burpees as fast as you can on its own, that can get pretty crappy, right? So, but you're doing that with a bunch of other things around it. So burpees are the worst, and then the row is just, it's like grit and will. Like you just have to go because 250 it ends pretty quickly. But yeah, lactic endurance, and then the ability to recover from work. So we will see, I don't care who you are, if you're putting out power, you will see a degradation here. The best scores that we've seen are around 310, 325, 335, 340. That's really good, really good. So, 330 though, 330 set number 1 is also very, very good. And then if you guys do this thing, or if you have done this before, you know what I mean. 330 is moving. So just to wrap your brain around someone finishing this in sub 310 is just obscene. That means they're holding 120 on the rower, both sets, and their burpee turnover is just it's fast, right? Because kettlebell swings, you can't really make kettlebell swings that fast. Obviously, you need to go snatch variation, not big swing variation of the swing to make turnover, to cut 25% of range of motion off to make it a little bit quicker. But the people that start to organize their brains around how do I adjust movements so it doesn't hurt as bad, those are the people that aren't going to have really good scores. The people that have really good scores are I need to game this so my score is as best as possible, not so I feel good. So even saying that, you're like, ooh, yeah, that's that's a different approach, right? So, someone that wants to win this test, they approach it as like, how do I go faster? How do I, I don't give a shit how I feel or what my breath rate is. I just need to get through it as fast as humanly possible. And it really shows on the burpees.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my chest and my triceps going into those burpees and how to make it hurt less with a nice big old wormy burpee. But yeah, I'm definitely not that person that's strategizing of how to finish the movements faster.
You got to, though. You got to this week, Georgia. It's the goal.
When do we do this one? I want company. I don't want to do it by myself.
Yeah, let's do this one. Best to have a day off after this.
Yeah.
Or easy work. So maybe
Friday morning.
Yeah, probably Friday.
Friday morning. It's going down.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
We will. We'll
Friday's actually a busy day for me, calls wise. So I don't know.
Maybe not.
I might not be cognitively there if I do this on a Friday.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay, we're giving us to a CrossFitter though, right? Some mixed modal athlete.
Yep, just a mixed modal athlete. That's it. That's the only person that needs this.
And scores matter coming into season, like pre-comp. Is that when you'd be looking at something like this?
Yeah. So power, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same conversation. So power is going to be higher, but degradation is going to be further, or degradation is going to be higher as well. The further someone is out from season. This is one where you can't fake this one, right? I don't care how good of an athlete you are naturally, you can't fake it, because if you're not used to utilizing lactate, there's nothing you can do. You're not going to be able to go hard as possible 3 times and have good scores. Very similar to the 60-second assault bike, but this one is more. This one is a bigger separator, because there's a lot of opportunity to say, yeah, you're not ready for this, right? Someone on the 60-second assault bike, someone with a lot of power, they can accumulate 50 calories in 30 seconds. And then they can just slog their way and get an additional 10, and that's a good score. This one, you can't. There's no opportunity for that. You're doing too much. You're doing too much volume, and you're doing 3 sets. So someone that's not prepared for this, or hasn't done it in training, it's going to show, and it's going to be very evident when they hit this test.
That's what we're going to see.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. We'll let you guys know if we can talk when it comes to recording a podcast next week.
Mine will probably be, I'll probably go slower than I've gone in that. So I haven't done this test since 2013. If you want the story of that, look back, Emma, what was it? The videos that we did with James, I told my story. The last time I hit this test, that's in the download, actually.
Yeah, so download that guide in the description, guys.
Yeah, so James and I kind of chat through all of these, and I tell that story. But last time I did it, I had a pretty good score. I was 317, 330, 340, something like that. This one will be high threes, and I'll sustain it better than I did back then, just because I just don't do lactic work, and I do a lot of aerobic work. So my body will automatically have this gear in mind. Even if it's high in my head, it's going to have this gear of sustainability, and I'm going to have to push that as hard as I can. But I'll have to figure out where to do it. And for me, it'll be the burpees, because I can hold a good row, and then kettlebell swings are kettlebell swings. So for me, it'll be the burpee, but high threes, I'm thinking, for me. And I might even touch 4.
I'm looking forward to that 5-minute time cap. It's been a while since I swung 53 overhead, but I think I still got it.
Yeah, you can do it.
I can do it. Well, let's move on to some nicer tests. 5K row is our cyclical OPEX sustain test. So looking at aerobic capacity on the rower. Row is great so long as someone can row, they have, technique down and have built up some volume on the rower. Any other considerations for programming this one?
No. So for just giving it to someone, an assessment? No, not really. I mean, I like to look at splits and to look at, how they approached it and if it was the right approach or the wrong approach. I always like an incremental build on longer aerobic pieces so people don't empty their tanks. And we just get the enzymes flow, right? As like we get 5 or 10 minutes into anything, like we can find that flow in aerobic work. If someone comes out really hot the first 5 minutes and it's just hanging on, that is the worst experience ever, because the last 10 to 15 minutes are just brutal. So, just thinking about, first I would tell the person that's doing the test, I would just say, I wouldn't give them any strategies. I would just say, hey, approach this the best way you think is going to end up with you getting the best score that you can possibly get today. And then I would have them set their splits. I'd go 1K splits on this, and I'd just watch them and see how they approach it. People that have experience but that understand that they're not trained for it are going to approach with caution. They are going to take like let me kind of get into this, feel it out, and then roll hard at the end. People that are, dumb to the fact that this thing can start to hurt, they're going to come out really hot because they're just going to think like, okay, even if they're not trained for it, they're just going to say, okay, let me get as many meters accumulated in a small amount of time, and then I'll just hang on for the rest. And those are the people that either don't finish the test, or they're at like 2 minutes and 30 seconds per 500 meters, the last 5 minutes, just like slogging their way through. So yeah, it's a good one. It's a fun one. A lot of insights can come from the 5K.
I did a 5K with Sean back like end of 2018, I think, and then had like a 12 or longer week build on 1250 meter intervals after that, and then never retested the 5K because I was just feeling like stressed out and like needed to step back from it. And as those intervals started getting more and more intense and approaching threshold, I was like, I'm done. I need to step back from the rower. But I wish now in retrospect, I'm curious as to what it would have been after going through that. And
did you go like 5K, figure out what your race pace is, and then you started those 1250s at that race pace, and then you decreased your pace over time?
Yeah. Did some incremental sets towards the end, and that's when it started to get really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I decided I was done with it. But
that's a good point, though. Yeah, just training for this thing. The thought around the feeling of what it feels like in training can actually kill someone's confidence when they're thinking about retesting this thing. So a lot of the times, if you're not working with someone that is uber experienced on the rower and has a lot of meters accumulated, and they've done a lot of different types of programs on the rower, just having them hold around race paces for, let's call it 7 to 10K in training, and let's say that 7 to 10K is like a build over X amount of weeks, you can have someone just train at race pace, not get any faster in training, and they feel so confident and so good going into that test that they're going to get better just because the volume is no longer an issue for them, and they can start to like mess around with pacing and get faster over time and all of that. So the rower is one of those things, if it hurts, it's not an enjoyable thing to be on, especially for non-rowers. So yeah, I think the story that you just told, like a lot of people have felt that when they go on like any cyclical builds. Like if that was an assault bike and we're like, okay, we want to hold 65 RPM, and then we're getting 1 RPM faster every week, and you find that spot really quickly where the client's like, I don't think I can hold that again. You have to be okay with going back and just saying, okay, we're going to go back a little bit in pace, and maybe we're just going to add volume, or maybe we're going to decrease rest. But confidence on cyclical implements is so important, because once someone loses confidence in them, they just hate the thing. They're like, I hate the rower. The fucking sucks. It hurts. I'm not good at it. Blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
So that's a good point.
Yep, definitely went through that. Confidence and just building comfort at that race pace for sure. So we'll see. I don't know. I feel like I was before that. I think my 5K back end of 2018 was like around 24 or so. But I can look back in the archives and figure it out.
Yeah.
What are you thinking you'll be at?
Gosh, I don't know. I haven't rode a 5K for time in a long time. Probably in the 18s. I'm going to say in the 18s probably.
All right.
I gave myself a big window there. Somewhere in the 18s, 1801 to 1859.
It's okay.
Yeah, somewhere in there. We'll see.
Got
We'll
a
see how
hedge.
it goes. See how I feel.
Last test that we'll be
We have
hitting.
another one?
We have one more.
Holy shit.
I think we're going to drag James into this one as well. Tomorrow
the
on
18.
Sunday.
Yeah.
18-minute AMRAP. So it's a mixed modal aerobic test. 15 box jump step downs?
Yep,
Or
15.
15 box jumps?
Yep, 15 box jump step downs.
It is step down.
Yep,
Okay.
at 24:20.
Yep.
Then we have 12 shoulder to overhead at 75:55. And then we have 115.
115.75.
And then we have 9 toe to bar.
Toe to bar. Cool.
Yeah.
It's going to be muscle endurance for me.
12.3. This was 12.3. A version of 12.3. 12.3 was push press and box jumps, however the hell you want to do them.
Yeah.
So this one is shoulder overhead, so you can push jerk, and then we're saying you have to step down on the box jump.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something you'd be giving to someone who has developed those skills to the point that they can express them in an aerobic setting, right? They've, absolutely nailed them. They've made those dynamic contractions aerobic. I'm not that person for sure. Like you know me on the toaster bar. Like I have been working on them.
Yeah, the toe to bar in Georgia.
Yeah, 9 toaster bar is a lot for me right now.
They're looking better though. I saw you
they-
doing some toe to ring. You don't have that hitch at the end anymore.
Feeling a lot better, a lot more comfortable up there. But 9 over 18 minutes is going to be a lot. I'm going to game it from the beginning. It's going to be like small sets of 3 to feel nice and snappy, and it's not going to be the aerobic system that limits me. It's going to be just muscle endurance and the ability to keep that skill.
Yeah, which for anyone, even people that are really good, it's going to be muscle endurance that's going to limit them, because the movements are low barrier, but something's going to get you. Right? Is it going to be hip extension from going from the box jump to the shoulder overhead and the dip and drive, and essentially it's the same movement? Is it going to be shoulder endurance going from the shoulder to overhead specifically, and then having to control, the entire shoulder girdle on the toe to bar as you're going back and forth? For most people, it's not going to be breathing. This is just such a good test. I love it. It's one of my favorite. It's long, relatively. It's long because that's a lot of contractions that are happening over 18 minutes. If you've developed these skills independently, it's like you do get into a flow, and 5, 6, 7 rounds goes like that, and then once you get to round 5 or 6, now muscle endurance, you start to feel it. So now you start to game like, okay, how do I hold on to the pace that I have now, or do I need to settle into a new pace? So there's a lot of self-talk that goes on during this test, but the ones that execute it the best are the ones that just literally get lost in it. They find a flow, and before they know it, it's 15 minutes, and they're like, okay, now I need to pick it up because I want to get the best score possible. The ones that do the worst in this are the ones that are like, I need to break this up, and then I need to hold this for 18 minutes. Every round should take me about this much time. And then they get to round 3 and they're like, oh fuck, I'm 30 seconds over what I projected, and they start to get frustrated, not frustrated, flustered, and heart rate goes
and
up.
Frustrated.
Heart rate goes up because they're flustered, and it just kind of all goes to crap. I mean, this one is the limitation are the movements themselves, and how efficient are you at jumping onto a box, pushing a barbell overhead, and doing toe to bar.
And you are really getting like a great insight into full body muscle endurance in a mixed modal setting here.
Yep.
With those movements.
Yeah, it's a good one. We don't see a lot of these anymore. Hopefully this year with the open being more minimal, they bring something like this back. There's a pull-up bar, right? In the
I
open?
think so,
They could redo
yeah.
this. Shit, they could redo this. That'd
They
be good if
could.
they redid this one. It's a good test. But you look at something like IF3, and you start to look at like the mixed modal pieces inside of IF3, and they do a lot of tests like this, which is good to see.
There's no cyclical modality in there where you kind of get to recover a little bit and shake the shoulders out, hips relax a little bit. There's none of that. It's
just go. Yeah, it's go. It's a good one though. It's a fun one, even if you don't execute it perfectly. It's a fun little test, and a lot of people can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Again, kind of client you would be giving it to would be a mixed modal athlete.
Yep. Or someone that's like, I want to get really good at box jumps, shoulder to overheads, and toe to bar. Give it to them too.
Any other?
Emma has this on Monday.
Emma, you can join us on Sunday. The more the merrier. Any other insights or reflections you would like to make before we go into this energy systems assessment testing week?
No. Yeah, I would just, tell people to not look at these as like, the end all be all for a particular energy system, because they're just really good insights to compare to other tests and assessments that we take our people through. And also don't just give them to people because they're there. Like you've done a really good job of saying, this is for this person, this is for this, you know what I'm saying? So like really take that stuff to heart and don't just, say, OPEX tells me to do all these tests, so I'm going to give them to everyone. Make sure that you have a really good reason before you give these to people. And most people probably don't need to do any of these, to be honest with you. We just like talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, if you are giving them to people, making sure you've been through them yourself and know what they feel like is probably important, which is, I think, why it's nice to keep ourselves honest as coaches and go through something like this every now and again.
Yeah.
It's good to stay true to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're taking years off of our lives for you guys, so hope you appreciate that.
Guys, like I said in the beginning, if you are appreciative of this self-sacrificial episode of Backroom Talk, next week will be all about the self-sacrifice. Today we're just educating. Please make sure you hit that like button. If you're on audio, leave us a review, share your feedback, and let us know what you'd like to hear from us in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.